I wasn't alive when Pong was released. But I do exist in a generation that is old enough to remember the very beginnings of video games. Like, while I may not have been old enough to see Pong released, I'm old enough so that my parents had old Pong consoles. I'm old enough that when I went to arcades, I could still find some of those old Pong cabs. I'm old enough that when I first started playing video games, I was able to go back and play the very first video game that was ever made. Not because I was doing a history project or I was trying to be a retro gamer or something, but because people just had it. And that puts elder millennials like me and late Gen Xers in this really interesting space where there's really no period in gaming that occurred before we were born. We were there for the rise and fall of the arcades. We were there for the beginnings of the home console market, the big Nintendo-Sega wars. We were there before polygonal models were commonplace. Heck, we were there when sprites with just two colors, were the biggest technological innovation. So when it comes to gaming history, we lived it. And it's kind of interesting coming from a place where you've experienced these things, seeing how history has changed for people who haven't. For example, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is now considered to have one of the best fighting game soundtracks of all time. That's just because the game is remembered fondly by people today who weren't really around to play it when it came out. When the game came out, we thought that soundtrack sucked. We thought it sucked so much we went out of our way to burn new CDs of the game on it, replacing the soundtrack with the Guilty Gear soundtrack. And these re-soundtracked versions of the game were run at like Evo. Wind Waker is one of the most loved Zelda games of all time now, but when it came out, everyone hated it. It was looked at as a major betrayal to the general Zelda aesthetic. We remember a time when all FPSs were called Doom clones, and were kinda frowned upon for trying to do what Doom did, when people called Quake and Half-Life just another Doom clone. Now don't get me wrong, being old doesn't make us special, as much as some annoying gamers try to make it seem that way. But it does mean that we've gotten to see gaming history unfold, and that's an interesting and kind of nice feeling. Like, remembering a time before the ESRB exists. That's wild. I remember when Mortal Kombat 2 got people in Congress talking about how awful video games were. And that was just a few drops of pixelated blood and spine. I was there before games had save systems, and then there were passwords, and then there were battery backup saves, and then there were memory cards, then eventually we just saved on a hard drive. But I think the most interesting thing is seeing where games are going to go into the future. Seeing how consoles have basically just become PCs. Seeing how we've all switched to digital distribution. There was a time when I thought games can honestly never look better than the original Super Mario Bros. And then Super Mario World. And then Final Fantasy VII. And now I'm playing Alan Wake 2 on my PC, and it doesn't just look like a movie, it looks better than some movies. I've lived through 40 years of game evolution, and I have no idea where the next 40 is going to take me.